Well, as you presented the Slavs as different ethnicities cooperating inside Russia, it makes me think of tribal times. And is there any kind of comparison between modern democracy and ancient tribal associations?
Yeah, I think now you're really getting into the meat of it. That is really what's going on, is that democracy is a facade. It's primarily a lie, and it's built upon the premise of divide and conquer. And it's so Orwellian, isn't it? Because on the face of it, it describes a system which brings everyone together and everyone expresses their view, but it really atomizes people, and it tries to place people into categories. And so within democracies, people are forced to vote for a party which represents pretty much a single ideology, if you will, and that all of these modern ideologies are sort of like grotesque distortions of views which everyone has. So within everybody, and this goes back to tribal societies, because I think it's evolutionary or spiritual, but as human beings all around the world, fundamentally, within every society, it's, whenever there is too great of a disparity of distribution of wealth or power, it leaves a bad taste, and people lose trust for their leaders. If people view themselves as suffering, but they see their own leaders, wrapped in gold and diamonds and stuff, it causes a distrust and causes further social divisions. So societies couldn't have survived historically on that trajectory. But the modern distortion of that is like communism or socialism. In other words, to be abhorred to be turned off by this gross inequality of wealth or power is why there's like this communist movement. And yet, when you look at like historical tribes, people weren't like all communists, but within each person there was that tendency that we now call communists to want to see a more fair distribution of the wealth and the power. However, and it's obviously there's more ideologies than just communism, right? There's liberalism, and liberalism today is like a gross distortion of another feeling or point of view that people used to have alongside their primitive communist view. So the idea of liberalism, that we're all individuals and that each person is responsible for their own lives in a vacuum, and that every person is entirely unique, and that every person is different from someone else, and the only thing that really connects us are our basic economic intercourse or pop cultural intercourse. But in the ancient world, or in tribal societies, the embryonic liberal view was simply that, when the tribe would sit around the campfire and try to figure out, their direction, or to make a decision over something practical, it was understood that each person in the tribe had a slightly different experience or might have a different input, and the tribe was stronger by being tolerant of or being open to individual views. But in the modern and postmodern distortion, the grotesque distortion is that this is sufficient as an ideology alone. So in the same way that communism today is a gross distortion of the tendency to react negatively to lack of appearance of inequality in the distribution of wealth and power, likewise, liberalism as a political ideology is a distortion of the truth that a tribe survives when different voices are heard, and it's respected that even among its leaders they will disagree. Likewise, with times have changed in many ways for the worse, and we seem to be on a down cycle. And so with these political ideologies are really meant to fragment people. So, in reality, most people who are communists have friends who are liberals, and most people who are liberals have friends who are nationalists. And the fact that you can make friendships with people that have different ideologies really proves that all these ideologies exist in your own head in a friendly way, side by side. But the myth of modernity and the lie of democracy makes you compartmentalize these things. In truth, you think you know someone, but you don't really know them. You know your own interpretation. You know your own perception of them. And so if you're a liberal and you have a friend who's a nationalist, well, you've actually made room inside of your own brain for nationalism. You see, you have a positive association with a nationalist, and this points to the truth that in primitive or ancient tribal societies, I hesitate to call them really primitive, but in ancient tribal societies, all of these memes, if you will, all of these political ideologies existed within everybody, and they weren't ideologies; they were just these tendencies, and societies. All these societies needed some sort of balance of all of these. You know, the idea that they were a tribe, an ethnicity, a race, or a nation existed in the context of there being other tribes, ethnicities, races, and nations, and that this served as a cohesion for all of the people, whether they were elders or whether they were youth, whether they were hunters, or within the tribe, the division of labor. The idea that they all belonged to a single tribe had a unifying effect. The gross distortion of that in modern times is when that's distorted towards a supremacist view, or a view that therefore one should conquer other people's and take what's theirs. And so in ancient history, I'm talking, you know, way back, the human populations were so low and the resources were so great, you see, and people lived far enough away from each other that it really wasn't a tremendous advantage to risk life and limb to go kill other people to take something which existed in abundance all around. What I think in the future is going to happen is that first of all, things might get worse before they get better. But one of the things that we're going to know that things are getting better is when political movements expose the myth of democracy, and political movements that are able to transcend these narrow categories that democracy has created. So a political movement that touched on the essence of what the human being really is. A political movement that was simultaneously spiritual, magical, and scientific, that was simultaneously communistic, liberalistic, and so forth, you see, and that all of these really represent what it means to be a human being, and that if you had a mass movement like that, it would be in the base sense truly democratic, but would explode, you know, the procedural parliamentary, you know, democracies that we're talking about. You wouldn't need elections. To echo, you know, the good Sheikh Imran Hussein, you only need parliamentary democracies. You only need democracies when you have a bunch of people who disagree. And I just don't think that the fundamental human experience is based upon that much disagreement. I think that disagreement is being created artificially to create a system of divide and conquer. And so they create vulgarized, extreme versions of all these different ideas that all of us really have.